Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of terrifying idea. How even the most brilliant, detailed plans can lead to absolute, world-changing disaster. And to kick things off, we're going to look at one of the greatest military catastrophes in all of human history.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1812, and we're with Napoleon Bonaparte and his Grande Armée. Now, this wasn't just any old army. We're talking about an unprecedented, continent-spanning force designed for one single purpose, to bring the entire Russian Empire to its knees.
I mean, just look at that number. 615,000 soldiers. To put that in perspective, that was the largest European army ever assembled up to that point. It was this massive, sprawling, multinational machine, with troops from practically every corner of Napoleon's empire.
Now, what's so wild about this is that Napoleon wasn't some fool walking into a trap. He knew exactly what he was getting into. He knew Russia was huge and mostly empty. So he planned the most complex, most detailed logistical operation of the entire era. He was absolutely convinced his preparation, his map for the campaign, was perfect.
But just 6 months later, this is the only number that mattered. Fewer than 100,000 men managed to stagger back. It was a complete and utter failure on a scale that's just hard to even comprehend. We're talking about a disaster that ultimately claimed nearly 1 million lives when you factor in all the casualties.
So, you have to ask, what went so catastrophically wrong? Well, the answer isn't just about bad weather or running out of supplies. The real failure was a failure of the imagination. It was a failure of the mind. It's what happens when you are so sure about how the world works that you refuse to see that the rules of the game have completely changed right under your feet.
And this right here, this is the heart of the problem. Napoleon's map of how war worked was simple. You march fast, you fight a big, decisive battle, you capture the enemy's capital, and boom, you win. But the territory, the reality of Russia, had a totally different plan. Their strategy was to retreat, to stretch his army to the breaking point, and to burn everything, leaving nothing behind for the invaders.
You know, we all have this image of the legendary Russian winter, of soldiers freezing in the snow. But here's the kicker. Napoleon's army was already shattered before the first major snowfall even hit. The real killers were typhus, dysentery, and starvation. They wiped out tens of thousands because Napoleon's map had no plan for a war where there were no battles to be won, no shelter to be found, and absolutely no food to take.
And all of this brings us to this really crucial concept, the map-territory fallacy. It's a simple but incredibly deadly mistake. It's when we confuse our model of reality, our map, for reality itself. Napoleon's map said victory was inevitable. The territory, well, it had other ideas.
Now, I promise this isn't just a history lesson, because this mistake, this map-territory fallacy, is absolutely timeless. In fact, you could say we're all living through our own modern versions of Napoleon's march on Moscow right now, with some pretty devastating consequences.
Just think back to the 2008 financial crisis. You had all these big banks relying on these incredibly elegant, complex risk models. These were their maps. And these maps all told them the same comforting story, that markets were predictable, that everything was safe. So they took on just staggering amounts of risk.
But of course, the map was not the territory. The models completely missed the possibility that a slump in the housing market could bring the entire global financial system to its knees. Over 13,000 investments rated AAA, which is supposed to be as safe as it gets, just vanished. They defaulted. The map promised certainty, but the real world delivered pure chaos.
And we saw the exact same pattern with the COVID-19 pandemic. Before 2020, there were all these official indices and scorecards ranking countries on how prepared they were for a pandemic. And guess who was at the top of the list? The US and the UK. But when the virus actually hit, well, we all saw that those rankings turned out to be almost totally meaningless.
So why were those maps so wrong? Well, for one, they were built to fight the last war. They were all designed for a flu pandemic, not a brand new coronavirus that could spread without symptoms. And they completely failed to account for the messy, unpredictable realities of human behavior and, frankly, political paralysis. The forecasts were just all over the place. Okay, so this all leads to a really big and kind of uncomfortable question. If our maps for war, for finance, for public health are so obviously failing us, time and time again, why on earth do we keep using them?
The answer is, well, it's depressingly human. Old maps, even when we know they're wrong, give us the comfort of certainty.
In a world that feels completely chaotic and unpredictable, a map, any map, gives us the illusion that we're in control.
And it goes even deeper than that. For big institutions, for regulators, for the experts themselves, admitting the map is wrong means questioning their own authority. Think about it. It is so much easier and so much safer for your career to just defend the old, broken model than it is to stand up and say, you know what, this is all wrong. We need to tear it up and start over. So if the problem isn't just that we have bad maps, but that we're psychologically attached to them, then what's the solution? Well, it's not about trying to find the one single perfect map. It's about developing a totally new relationship with our maps, one that's built on humility instead of arrogance.
The real goal here is to cultivate something called meta-awareness. It sounds a little fancy, but the idea is actually super simple. It's the ability to step back and see our models and our plans for what they are. Just models. They're our best guess, not the gospel truth. It's having the humility to constantly question your own assumptions and the courage to actually redraw your map when reality slaps you in the face.
And look, this isn't just some vague philosophical idea. It has real-world applications. It means building agile organizations that can actually pivot when things go wrong, unlike those rigid pandemic plans that completely fell apart. It means prioritizing humility, actively looking for the data that proves you wrong, which is the total opposite of what those banks did in 2008. It's about embracing multiple possible futures instead of clinging to a single forecast, and always checking your map against what's actually happening in the messy, real world. Let's just go back to Napoleon one last time. He sat there in a smoldering, empty Moscow for an entire month. He was just waiting for reality to bend to his map, waiting for a surrender that was never going to come. And in so many ways, that's us today. We're sitting in our own burning Moscows, clinging to failing economic models, outdated public health strategies, industrial-age school systems, just hoping that the world will magically go back to the way our maps say it should be. The future isn't going to belong to the people with the most detailed maps of a world that no longer exists. It's going to belong to those who have the courage to see when their map has failed and the wisdom to start drawing a new one. The only real question is how much longer can we afford to just sit here and wait?